Imagine you were a commander in ancient times. The horizon fills with dust. You don't know how many are coming, but you know their reputation. You've heard the stories. Entire cities wiped off the map. Millennia-old empires collapsed in decades. Warriors who never lose, military machines that rewrite the rules of power. The question that haunts you isn't whether you will die, but how long you will hold out before your world ceases to exist. Today you will discover something unsettling, that the history of humanity wasn't written by philosophers or prophets, but by armies capable of destroying entire civilizations with terrifying precision. This isn't just any ranking. It's the evolution of organized violence told as it should be, as a perfectly coordinated nightmare. Part 1. The birth of organized warfare. Before the great empires, war it was chaos, armed groups clashing without any real strategy, without logistics, all without a plan beyond killing or being killed. But something changed. Someone realized that violence could be organized, refined, and transformed into a system. And when that happened, the world was never the same again. The difference between a horde and a real army is not in the number of warriors, but in something darker. The ability to turn humans into replaceable parts of a machine designed to kill efficiently. Egypt was one of the pioneers. After expelling the Hyksos invaders, the pharaohs stole their technology and improved upon it. The Egyptian light war chariot was a psychological weapon on wheels. 2 men, one driving, the other firing a composite bow, capable of piercing armor at impossible distances. The sound of hundreds of approaching chariots would break formations before the first contact. But all that power depended on one fragile element: the pharaoh. When the leadership was strong, Egypt was unstoppable. Thutmose III launched 17 campaigns in 2 decades. But when the pharaoh was weak, the machine crumbled. No system could survive without a strong leader, and that made them fatally vulnerable. Ramses II faced this at Kadesh. His army was nearly annihilated by a catastrophic intelligence failure. The forces were scattered, disorganized, and on the verge of being massacred. Ramses managed to avert total disaster, but the battle ended in a draw. Though what is fascinating is what he did afterward. He turned a failure into the greatest propaganda victory of his reign, carving heroic scenes into every temple. This reveals something fundamental. It wasn't always who won the battle that mattered, but who controlled the narrative afterward. Egyptian mobility was their greatest advantage. Using the Nile as a logistical highway allowed them to move troops faster than any land enemy, but their infantry was basic. Lacking innovation in close combat, they relied too heavily on speed and archery. Then Assyria appeared, and everything changed. If Egypt professionalized speed, Assyria professionalized terror. They were the first to maintain a standing army. Soldiers trained year-round, ready to move at a moment's notice. This gave them an advantage that took others centuries to match. They could react instantly and sustain campaigns for years. Composite bows with lethal range, massive rectangular shields, bronze and iron armor superior to any contemporary protection. But their true innovation was developing royal cavalry, heavy lancers capable of devastating charges, and their siege engineering changed urban warfare forever. Mobile battering rams, siege towers, sappers digging beneath walls to bring them down. If you were defending a city and saw an Assyrian army approaching, you knew your walls didn't matter. The only question was how much suffering you could endure before surrendering. Here Assyria revealed something unsettling. Terror wasn't sadism, it was logistics. The mass deportations, the public executions, the piles of skulls, everything was calculated. The goal was to make the next city surrender without a fight. Every act of brutality reduced future resistance. It was a cold equation. Enough fear now meant fewer casualties later. They dominated Mesopotamia, the Levant, Anatolia, even Egypt. For centuries they seemed invincible. But they had the same problem as all systems based on fear. They function perfectly until someone stops being afraid. When they overextended themselves, when coordinated rebellions erupted simultaneously, everything collapsed. Nineveh, the capital that seemed eternal, was so completely razed that it vanished from history. This reveals something crucial. The first great armies were powerful but fragile. They depended on unique elements that, if they failed, brought everything crashing down. In Egypt without a strong pharaoh, Assyria without consistent victories. They were revolutionary, but they had not yet solved the fundamental problem: how to create a military machine that would outlive its own creators. For that, you needed systems that functioned independently of the leader. You needed empires that transformed warfare into a science. If this is hooking you, leave a like and continue with Part 2. This is where war stops being improvised and starts being planned. Then Part 2. Empires that conquer the world methodically. The next evolution didn't come from stronger soldiers or more lethal weapons. It came from something more subtle and dangerous, turning violence into a system that could be replicated on a continental scale. Persia understood this better than anyone. When Cyrus the Great expanded the empire, he did so by building the most advanced administrative infrastructure of the ancient world: imperial roads with relay stations, strategic depots, and a communication system that transmitted orders across thousands of kilometers in days. The Immortals formed the core: 10,000 elite soldiers with spears, scythe swords, composite bows, and that chilling characteristic. Their ranks were instantly replenished. One Immortal fell, and another took his place. From the outside, they appeared to be a force that never waned. But the true Persian power lay in integrating different military cultures into a coordinated machine. Median cavalry, any Egyptian archers, Babylonian heavy infantry, Lydian horsemen. Their strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Saturate the field with so many arrows that the sky darkens. Thousands of archers in coordinated waves, weakening formations, breaking cohesion. Then you unleash heavy cavalry against the flanks. It's not elegant, it's mathematics applied to destruction. Persia revealed something about large-scale warfare. You don't need to be the best in individual combat if you can coordinate resources that no rival can match. They could mobilize larger armies, sustain them longer, and replace losses faster. Logistics became the ultimate weapon, but even Persia had cracks. Its size was both a strength and a weakness. Coordinating diverse cultures required constant political attention, and when they faced an enemy that understood their system, that massive power proved less invincible than it seemed. That enemy was the Greeks. The hoplite phalanx is one of the simplest and most lethal concepts in history. Men in bronze armor, heavy shields locked together, 3-meter spears, advancing as a single organism. There is no individual heroism. Your survival depends on the man next to you. If he breaks, you die. If you break, he dies. This created a unique psychology. You didn't fear death as much as failing your brother in arms. And constant training reinforced this. Movements synchronized to the rhythm of flutes. Every hoplite knew exactly what to do because he had practiced it 1,000 times. Sparta took this to an almost inhuman level. Children were torn from their families at the age of 7. They were raised under extreme discipline, ritualized violence, and collective shame for any weakness. By the age of 20, a Spartan was a perfected machine whose sole function was to maintain formation and kill. At Marathon, the Athenians proved that discipline could overcome overwhelming numbers. At Plataea, Greek coordination shattered Persian lines. At Thermopylae, a few thousand held a narrow passage for days, demonstrating absolute control of the terrain. But the phalanx had fatal limitations. It was rigid. It functioned on flat terrain, in direct pitched battle. In forests, hills, or situations requiring rapid maneuvers, it broke apart. Without effective heavy cavalry, it was vulnerable once fragmented. What you needed was a combination of Greek discipline, mobility, and flexibility. Someone who understood that war wasn't just about withstanding impact, but about orchestrating complex movements that no enemy could predict. Macedonia, under Philip and Alexander, created exactly that. Philip saw the hoplites' weaknesses and built something better. The sarissa, a 4 to 6 meter long spear, transformed everything. The first 5 ranks had spears at the front, creating a wall of points that no enemy could penetrate. It was like trying to charge against defensive blades. The Macedonian phalanx was the anvil, the hammer was the companions. Elite cavalry executing wedge charges with surgical precision. Alexander understood timing. While the phalanx immobilized the enemy, the cavalry had seconds to identify the weak point and shatter it. It wasn't brute force. It was geometry applied to human destruction. At Gaugamela, Alexander faced a numerically superior Persian army. He should have lost. Instead, he expanded his formation, absorbed the initial charge, and personally drove a wedge straight to where Darius stood. Once the king fled, the whole thing fell apart. Macedonia dismantled the Persian Empire with impossible precision. But Macedonia was brilliant and unstable. It depended on exceptional leadership. When Alexander died, everything collapsed into civil wars. They had created a perfect machine for conquest, but not for lasting. The lesson was clear. You could design perfect tactics, but if your system couldn't survive without geniuses, it would eventually fail. You needed something that learned from defeats, that adapted to any enemy, that turned ordinary soldiers into lethal veterans, and that lasted for centuries. For that, you needed Rome and Mongolia. If you want to see how this system reaches its final form, subscribe and continue with Part 3. That what's coming is no longer war, it's domination. Part 3. Machines of absolute domain. The two armies that brought these eras to a close represent opposing philosophies of military dominance. One conquered the world in a generation through sheer speed. The other ruled it for centuries through systematic resilience. The Mongol army under Genghis Khan was a nightmare for any settled civilization. Not because they were more brutal, but because they understood that in war, information and speed matter more than size. Every Mongol warrior was a lethal mounted archer, trained from childhood. They used composite bows with the power to penetrate armor. Their armor consisted of lamellae, and they carried swords and spears. Multiple horses per rider allowed them to cover more than 100 kilometers a day, while European armies typically covered 20. But their true power was organizational. Genghis Khan forbade promotions based on birth, only merit. Well, this created officers capable of independent decision-making, executing maneuvers without direct orders, and adapting instantly. Other cultures needed commanders shouting orders. The Mongols operated as decentralized agencies. Their tactics were decades ahead of their time. A feigned retreat, executed with perfect discipline, lured enemies into ambushes. Coordinated envelopments stretched for miles. Waves of arrows shattered formations before contact. They could fire in any direction while galloping, a skill almost impossible to counter. Intelligence was systematic. Scouts weeks ahead identified everything: water, routes, weak rulers, rebel factions. The YAM system transmitted information with speed unmatched until the telegraph. They could coordinate armies across continents. Their adaptability was terrifying. Against fortified cities, they recruited Chinese engineers, trebuchets, early gunpowder, mining equipment. Against steppe opponents, they dominated through mobility. Against Russians, they fought in snow. They integrated local specialists, strengthening the machine. But Mongolia revealed a weakness. Momentum-based armies need constant expansion, or they collapse. Their system depended on continuous plunder, new territories, and victories to maintain cohesion. When expansion stopped, the empire fragmented. They had created the most perfect conquest machine, but not one for governing. Rome did the opposite. It built a system not to conquer quickly, but to last forever. The Roman legionary wasn't the best individual warrior, but he was part of the most resilient military system ever created. Brutal daily training, rotation of fresh troops. Every legionary could fight, build fortifications, execute complex tactics. The maniples and cohort structure allowed for flexibility impossible for phalanxes. They could rotate fresh units to the front, absorb charges, and exploit gaps with precision. The gladius, optimized for thrusting, dominated close combat. The pilum bent on impact, rendering enemy shields useless. Roman engineering amplified that power. Every night they built fortified camps, roads, bridges, and mobile siege engines. At Alesia, Caesar trapped a Gallic army with double fortifications, turning the besiegers into the besieged. Rome learned from every defeat. They adopted Numidian cavalry, Greek siege tactics, Iberian swords, and Eastern archery. And every improvement was standardized. At Zama, they neutralized elephants. Even disasters triggered reforms, not collapse. The crucial difference, Rome didn't rely on military geniuses. The system functioned without them. Veteran centurions maintained discipline. Standardized training ensured quality. Soldiers were replaceable without losing effectiveness. It wasn't the most elegant. It was the most durable. Rome conquered regions and transformed them into Roman territories. Infrastructure, laws, administration, and eventual citizenship. This created a strategic depth that Mongolia never achieved. They could lose battles and still win wars because the system absorbed losses and continued to function. This is the ultimate truth. Tactical brilliance matters, but systemic resilience wins. Mongolia conquered more territory faster than anyone else. Rome ruled it for centuries. One was lightning fast, the other, an immovable mountain. Which was truly the most powerful army that ever existed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. It depends on what you mean by power. If it's absolute speed, Mongolia. If it's lasting domination, Rome. If it's revolutionary innovation, Macedonia. If it's systematized terror, Assyria. Each dominated its era, not just through force, but by understanding something fundamental that their enemies didn't grasp until too late. Warfare was never about who had the best soldiers. It was about who engineered the best systems for turning humans into cogs in a machine of destruction that would function generation after generation. If this dive into history's most terrifying military machines has you hooked, comment which army you think deserves to be here, and subscribe for more stories where the past reveals truths you'd rather not know. See you next time.